Thank you so much for this very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. So, network visualization is all about tangling and untangling a data set to get new insights about a research object. It's not in itself a way to produce knowledge, but I mean to question our hypothesis, as in general with data visualization. And it's very interesting to see that we have this temptation to use the term network or to use the network metaphor to describe objects in our different domains here. It's very likely to be the case in my own field when you study global history and international organizations. We often describe this institution with multiple branches, umbrella organization, sharing board member, different levels of secretariats, subcommittees, and it appeared to me that it's not something that is this network metaphor that is not only useful in my own field, because we already heard many times the word network since this morning, and even the picture on the event that is illustrating the event we are in today, the workshop, is a picture of this your project here with the picture of a network around one of the writer in Lviv. So we will try to question this concept of network, and of course I'm not here to present you all the ways we can deal with networks in history. That's of course a question I'm always trying to inspect and to turn in every possible way. But I will illustrate it with one of my research on intellectual cooperation during the interwar period. But before going to this example, I will just draw a few or recap a few things about network analysis and how it can be used for historical purposes. All what I will say about this concept of network, of what is network in historical sciences, is of course something that I'm experiencing every day in my own research. That all what I say here is not the dictionary of historical network analysis, it's more the observation I'm making on what a network is and how we can use that beyond the metaphor, because the metaphor, you will see it everywhere, but then how do we get a formal network? What are the relations between people, institutions? How do we formalize that to get what is called a social network analysis, even if it's not always completely social, because sometimes the relations are not relations between people, that can be simply flows of money, trains, I don't know what, that's a network. And what is very interesting is that the metaphor of network is something that is completely related to our experience of the real world. Of course, we speak about networks when we enter a metro station. Here are a few cities. I present this example here because you are working on urban questions, so probably most of you will recognize a few of them. And we are always thinking in terms of network when we are entering a metro station. So that's very interesting to see that this metaphor is not, well, is concrete in our own experience of daily life. We are trying to, we will take the line number 2 or the yellow line, I don't know, because we know we want to go from the point A to point B, and we'll have to change here because it's the closest place, or because we have to make more or less changes from the yellow to the red lines, or I don't know what, line 1 to line 2. But what is very interesting with the metro networks is that the picture you have when you enter the metro is not a network that is visualized like that. That's a network that is visualized to be seen by the people entering the metro. That's an image that is produced to make you understand the metro network without being precisely the geographical situation of the city, because you will not be able to understand it if all the dots are visualized precisely on the place they're supposed to appear. So it's a network that is drawn to make you clearly see the situation, but that is not really completely correct. And that is something very important about social network analysis. We have many different ways to represent it. And the way we use to represent it is just an artifact that helps us reading it. That's not something that is changing the data that is behind the network itself. You can visualize your metro network like that, or like the plan with the colors. That's two very different ways to present it, but the data that is behind, the nodes and the edges, the links between these dots, these are not changing from one representation to another. What is very interesting is that if you take the first historical representation of a social network, which is the representation of Jacob Moreno in the 1930s, is that this representation is a very good example of how to visualize a network to show something. Probably you know this is a very well-known experiment of Moreno, who take many different school classes and ask this typical exercise you do at the beginning of the year. You ask every children in the room, do you want to be seated here with him or with her, or and so on. And so he asked all the children to write 2 names on papers, and then collect all the names and then visualize it that way. That's the first time formally that someone is really drawing a network with dots and lines. Of course, we visualize this kind of dots and lines to represent many other things, trains and so on before, but this is the first time for a social relation between people. And what he wants us to see here is the lack of relation between boys and girls. He put the boys left and the girls right. This is a redrawn version of this network, but it is exactly on the same place in the original book. And he compares every year to show that the network evolved in terms of relation between boys and girls. But if we take today this network and we use a social network analysis software, we'll get something like that. You still have the boys left in gray and the girls in blue and light gray. And what you see is that if you use this software that is like putting like magnets on the table, where some are attracting others and some are repulsing others, you realize that in the girls group, in fact, there are 2 groups. There are 2 communities in this group, and the blue one is not more connected to the rest of the girls than to the group of the boys. This is something you of course cannot see here. This is the blue group here, that is in fact not connected to the light gray here. It's connected only via this bridge here and this one here, and has the same number of connections here. So that's just to show you, to introduce to this concept of networks, and to tell you that all the networks I will show you today are simply visualization, representation of a data set that are here to help us understand the subject, but are not the map of something or the reality. Well, you know very well, people in geography know that the map is not the territory and so on. So that's always the same thing here. We are always using a technical mean to visualize relations that can be visualized in other ways. And sometimes we'll see that we'll have to try to find other way to represent them, to see something else. And of course, behind that, and you will see that very well in multiple papers on network analysis. Generally, we don't even visualize networks. We just analyze it with a graph theory, with the mathematics that are behind. With different ways of measuring the positions of persons, of nodes in the structure. And that's what's very interesting for us historians, to try to find the network behind our object, is to be able to contextualize it, not just looking at the people who are the neighbor of a person in our network, but also to see if this neighborhood is connecting to other communities, or if it is a very strongly connected community around the, I don't know, the writer we are working on, or the intellectual, or the politician, I don't know. But to see, to be able to qualify the position of this person in terms of the structure of the network that is around. If we question more precisely on the way we can produce a network from historical sources, I would say we have many different possibilities, and I like to present them that way, to say that in fact we have 4 ways to speak about networks when doing history. There is the metaphorical way we spoke about already, just simply using this vocabulary to describe a situation, to say the people I'm working on. He's the bridge between two communities. He's the one who is linking people together. So the term linking, bridge, groups, communities are words that comes from graph theory. But in fact, you will never formalize these relations, you will never visualize it, you will never analyze it with the math itself. And then the second step is what I call the reconstituted network, which is a drawing, an infographic, a drawing that helps you compile all the information you have on a certain subject, and you will put everything together on the same map. But maybe you will have heterogeneous information. You will have information about personal relations, about institutional relations. You know that this one exists, so you will draw a line that is gray and not black because you're not sure, and so on. So that's the summary, the reconstitution of the subject. And in many cases, that's a very decent way to summarize an object or a network for research. But of course, we will generally want to go to the next step, to the network that will be analyzable with the math, and not just a representation, a graphical representation of a network. So that's what I call the extracted network, which is a network that comes from the source itself, the content of the source. You will, for example, have like lists of people that were present at a certain, I don't know, conference, for example. So we take the list of the people from this workshop, from the previous workshop, and then we make the network of people who were present at the same workshop at the same time, and so on. Well, I'm not sure it's very interesting for these workshops, because we'll see the people from the center here that will be connecting the others. But, well, imagine that for many other, like analyzing committees, changing time of year after years, and so on. That's a very popular way of analyzing and formalizing networks and history. That's probably the most used, the extracted network that comes from the sources, or people mentioned in the same page in a book, and so on. And then you will have the last version. That is not the best one, in fact. That's not a gradation of quality. That's simply different ways of using the historical sources to produce a network. Is the metadata network, so that's the circulation network. That's not anymore about the content of the sources, that's about the movement of the source, the metadata, like the people who wrote the letter and the one who received it, and you map that. You're not concerned anymore with the content of the letter, but you know that this one wrote to this one 20 times in 1920, okay, and he wrote 10 times to this one in 1923, and I don't know. You continue this this process. And to give you just a few examples of these networks, the best example for the reconstituted network, in my opinion, is this network that is showing the relation between the families in Florence, Italy, in the 15th century. So you have the Medici in the center, and all the families that are connected. This is also one of the first formally drawn network in historical science, or the one that is the most cited in the field. This paper of Paget and Ansel in '93. And here, what is very interesting is that they are completely recomposing the field. They are trying to draw what they know about the families. They know very well that they don't have all the relation between all the families. They are extracting them from the sources, from very different sources. They know from this source that the Medici were connected. They were giving money to this family, and they married a son to this one. But how to compare the relation between two families if it's a financial one, and once it's a wedding? Is that the same thing? Can you compare that or not? Well, we put everything on a map like that, so that helps show and understand the subject. But that's not something you will be analyzing to see that or to tell that Medici was the biggest family at this time. It's maybe simply because they have the best archives, and the documentation on this family is of course better than other families. So that's a heterogeneous data, but already that shows a very decent, interesting picture of this network. So that's already a formalization of this metaphor. And if I take my own subject, I would say, so my own research subject is the Intellectual Cooperation Committee within the League of Nations during the interwar. So a committee that was supposed to coordinate science and culture and to try to make people speak together again after the First World War in the scientific field. I would, for example, reconstitute the network, the organizational formal network, which is almost a tree here, of the League of Nations itself, and to try to reconstitute from the report which element was member of which section has how many committees, which Undersecretary General was in charge of which department, and so on, and to try to have this global picture. And this is already a reconstituted network, because I'm working with many reports to see that, because League of Nations wasn't producing lots of organization charts like this one. So this is the first way of representing a reconstituted network about League of Nations, for example. We have, of course, many others. If we take an example for the extracted network, here is a network that is the network of people, members of philanthropic charities in Geneva at the beginning of the 20th century. So that's a project from colleagues that are mapping who is in which committee and who's connected to whom through the philanthropic committees. So that's really a very good example of what we are doing generally in history when we are doing social network analysis. We are taking committee lists. That's very popular, and that's a source that is already very formalized, so that's easy to put that in an Excel and to map it like that. In the case of the League of Nations, I can simply take all the employees of every department and map them like that, and to see which employee goes from which department to which other, or which secretariat, and so on, and to see, well, here I put blue on the people who were involved in intellectual cooperation, to see if they were on another board before and if they went somewhere else after. So that's really many lists put together. But here the difference between this one and the first one is that here these lists are really completely directly extracted and transformed into a network. There's no more interpretation of who is supposed to be where. It's simply the source that is visualized like a network. And if we take our third or fourth way of using historical sources to produce network visualization, we all know this kind of metadata network of circulation of knowledge. Well, the Republic of Leather project from Stanford, other projects in Great Britain, especially on letters exchanges. So this is a very also popular way to visualize it, which is very interesting because it's projecting the network on a map, which is very good to see here the difference between Franklin and Voltaire correspondences, of course. You see, well, the pattern is very explicit, but once again, it's like for the Metro map or the Moreno's map, there are other things you can see here. Like, for example, I don't know if Voltaire wrote to many other people who were also in Paris or Geneva or Lyon, they won't be displayed here because you can just see different nodes overlapping. That's just a visual trick to see the relation over the Atlantic Ocean, but that's not suitable to show you the relation between people who are living in Paris, for example. So once again, that's always a way to try to play with the spatial aspect of the graph to see something, and then to come back to another type of visualization to see something else, always with the same data set. And that's also something I'm always trying to make people understand, is that you have not only different way of using the historical sources to visualize a network, but more generally about data visualization. That's something that we already spoke to today. We have different ways of using data visualization. First of all, different type of source we are using, if it's infographics, information visualization, and especially, I would say, the vertical axis here, the difference between something that is made for demonstration and something that is made for research. And in between, I would say, you have this category that I called interface, that is something that is in between. Sometimes you will produce a visualization that is just to make people understand what you're working on, or just for you to have a nice illustration for your paper. And sometimes you will produce a visualization that is just for you, that is for you to understand the data set. Someone told this morning, I don't remember I don't remember who did that, but to say we don't have the brain a sufficient brain to be able to read our Excel file and to be able to understand directly what it is in. And sometimes you just have to visualize it to get a matrix, a complete matrix with full of colors that you will never publish in a paper, because nobody will be able to read it, but for you, that will be your entrance in your data set, the way to understand it. And very often networks, in fact, are these research visualizations that are not suitable for publication. Well, we will publish them anyway because we want to show something, but in fact, the reader will not be able to read it. It's a tool for you to get back to your data and to understand the structure. And this interface visualization is very interesting for the networks, I would say, because you can really make people play with the data, play with the visualization itself to try to understand it better, like visualizing a theater play with a network of people speaking to each other, to browse all the theater play, and to be able to see that this one is speaking to those at this moment, to those at this other, or to use the wonderful tool from the University of Luxembourg, histograph, to map documents, exchanges, well, co-occurrences of people in documents, and to be able to see the documents also. But it's very interesting with the international consortium of investigative journalists also. That's not anymore really history, but that's also network used as an interface to share information between the journalists about the Panama Papers and so on. And of course, your own example here, which is an interface network visualization too. But I guess you will present it after. That's the pre-introduction for your talk. So let's go to the example now, to my own research, so how to make that possible in a precise research, without saying that's, of course, that's not just the only way of doing that. That's mine for this project, but you're, of course, all the other possible analyses are good as well. Well, they're not all good as well, in fact. Not to say that I'm doing the right one, but it's also something very classical that we see a network everywhere. And sometimes we will try a network analysis on our historical subject, and in the end we will realize that it wasn't really relevant to the subject itself. Maybe we are just, with our use of this metaphor, we are using it way too much, and we are trying to apply it to our subject, and maybe the subject is not suitable for this analysis. So even if the data is, because from a spreadsheet, from an Excel, CSV, I don't know what, you can always produce a network that's not always meaningful. But to come back to this example, so the network of intellectual cooperation, so to present it quickly, so this is the committee in 1922, meeting in Geneva in the Palais Wilson, which was the headquarters of the League of Nations. This committee was founded in 1922 and was active until 1939, and was really composed with a few people. In fact, it was 12 people at the beginning, and then it goes to 15, 18 at the end of the interwar. But that was really a place where we're gathering experts, scientific personalities really at the eighth of their career, like Marie Curie that we see. For example, here we have Hendrik Wyneken, another Nobel Prize. It was chaired by Henri Bergson, also Nobel Prize. You have Christine Bonnevie, a very important Norwegian zoologist. People from mostly Europe, of course, because of League of Nations was a European and almost French and British thing, but of course it became more diverse with time. But what is very important is that it's really a place. It's not a place for administrators or diplomats. It was a place for scientists, basically. Yeah, perfect. What do we do when we analyze the archives of the intellectual cooperation? So my goal was to not to try to recompose the network of these people, but to try to compare what they did to what they were supposed to do, or to compare the organization of the League of Nations and this committee and its different subcommittees and so on with the structure of the exchanges that appeared around this committee. So what I'm interested in is not the content of this letter from Marie Curie to a secretary, but is the fact that she's connected to this person at this precise moment. And when we do that for a few documents, like 30,000, we get this hairball. So that's exactly what we call a hairball or a spaghetti monster, you know, because of like if it was spaghetti with a bolognese in the center. That's really a network that is not readable as such. Well, you can of course produce an interactive visualization on the web. Well, if you want to see it, I put a demo online just to be able to click on the nodes to know who is connected to whom. But in fact, we really have to dig into this visualization to try to get something out from it. Well, you can already work on the math behind, on the data behind. You can know who is connected to whom, how many times, when, and so on. So that means that you will be able to work with centrality measures, to work with different ways of highlighting the position according to the structure of the network. You will be able to focus on a few people, like comparing the position of these two Belgian intellectuals to see who they were writing to and so on, to focus only the network on them, to take only the document where these people appear, to be able to be very precisely interested in the relation of these two people and their concurrence on trying to be connected to everybody or not. You can of course try to get a sense of the temporality of the network, to see the evolution of the structure. But of course here it's still something that is more about collecting butterfly, you know, that's just pinning butterfly on a wall, because in fact you're not really comparing the structure itself. It's not, even if it's year by year here, it's not very readable. So what I'm trying to do to try to untangle this network is to introduce this vertical dimension, this vertical organization, to try to understand how they are interacting together, how these 3,000 people are interacting together within a frame that is the organizational frame. I call it some kind of institutional topography. We have many ways to deal with verticality in networks. What is very important is to prepare your model when you're doing that. So introducing the level of the individuals, the level of the institution, the level of the top institution, the level of the documents within the people, then to flatten this network and so on. But it's not exactly the point here to present you exactly how the model works. But what is very interesting is that we are using all the possible networks we are building around this subject to make one and to try to simplify it to make it readable. So you will use the organizational chart, you will use the network that is showing who is supposed to be where in the chart, and you will take the metadata, so the circulation network, to try to compare them. And this is the visual result of this exercise, precisely on this, precisely visualized for the purpose of this research. So that means that you can organize it in many different ways. That's like the mapping. That's like the world map or the Atlantic map. In fact, that's a kind of geography. And you will see here are my 12 experts. Here are the secretaries of these experts. Everything that is left is the thing that appears, or the people that are inside the League of Nations. Everything that is right are the groups of people outside that are not very well defined. You see here in the NGO, we find maybe 1,000 people, in fact. So the definition of the organization is much more precise here, because we have this information and we don't have always the information for the people outside. Well, we can filter them very different ways as well. And here, what is interesting is is to be able to see that okay, the secretaries are more active than the expert themselves, which is quite obvious for an international organization, where they are really writing the letters for the others, or gathering the information from outside and so on. But to play with this new way of seeing the network, to try to get new insight. Like, for example, if you are questioning the network about who is the bridge between communities, so running one of the centrality measures that is possible with graph theory, to see that, for example, these people here, they have a few people here have a very strong, very high value for this metric that shows people that are connecting people together, and then to, once again here as an historian and not as a data scientist, to try to know why all the people who have a high value of these measures are here and not somewhere else. There is a big debate on the people working on Lviv Nation on these people here, and this analysis here will be able to bring more information about this debate, that will be able to discuss the importance of these different structures. Of course, we can come back to highlighting people, and we'll see that why this one was more successful than this one is that because this one is more connected to the very core of the network, the expert, and this one is just connected to one of them. That explains why this one has been very frequently less listened than this one by these people. We can also play with the temporality or themes to try to filter the network, to try to understand something that has to do with a signature of the network, something appearing here, something appearing here, to make difference between different parts of the dataset. We can exclude people from inside just to see the relation with the outside, and so on. Yeah. Let's. So my conclusion here is to say to come back to this question of visualizing network and to make very understandable that we have to play with it. We have to change the way we visualize it, and of course to use it as a tool to get back to the archives, because you can see something with the measures here. The purpose, of course, is to come back to the document to see which document precisely is connecting to people to make this one very central or this one very peripheral. And so this presentation was here to arouse your curiosity about this observation and these techniques, and to remind, like others reminded before, that this kind of analysis is a tool that is excellent to ask new questions, but not to answer them for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So let's continue with question-answer networking. And I will again collect 3 questions. Yes, please?
Yeah. With all those spaghetti monsters, how to work with this data? How to use it and how to analyze? Because all those links are, it's really hard to understand all those links on the screen. So how to use this data and how to work with it?
Any more questions?
Yeah, you mentioned that one of the points is that there is this Paris committee whose role was much discussed. So what are the conclusion of your network analysis on that question?
Okay.
Yeah, I just, now I have something else to do. My question is this. So for someone who wants to get started with this, what is the first step? Is it similar to mapping in terms of creating a database of some kind? Or what is the document that one creates before plugging it into whatever platforms you're using to create these really beautiful network diagrams?
So answering.
Yes. So the question about the how to work with the spaghetti monster is well, the answer is about this network as interface. Is considering them as an interface and playing with a software that is not just producing a static visualization, but producing something that is interactive, where you can click on something, color a few things, color other things, play with it, play with a special representation. And most of the, no, not most, some software are able to do that. Some are just producing static visualization, some are producing interactive online visualization, but are just good to show something and to interact with it, but not really to play with it in terms of moving things, and of course it's not just about moving things, but it's really about filtering things and removing everything I don't want to see, focusing on a special group. There is a dimension of game with that as well. You are playing with your data. That's not just an expression. That's really playing with it and being very near your data and to dig into the data. And of course, you rarely get this kind of spaghetti monster if you are a beginner, probably because you will not spend, like me, 2 years indexing archives to get that, because that's not something that is digitized, of course. So that means that if you spend 2 years indexing that, every week going 2 days to the archive to index that in a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet, I don't know, you have a very good idea of what is behind. Even, well, when you see the network, you know already who is who, and you have this. Well, and that's why also this is not something just for data scientists. That this is what digital humanity is about: is people meeting together and people becoming hybrid or hybridating themselves to become able to play with this two fields that are coming together. So yeah, I would say it's a long process to understand. My conclusion on Paris for the second questions. What is very interesting is that in general, people consider that things after 1936, when this Paris Institute was created, after a while, this Institute of Intellectual Cooperation that became after the Second World War the UNESCO today. Many people are analyzing today intellectual cooperation as if it was the preparation for UNESCO, or some kind of, because of course they were not aware of the war coming and so on. But this is a kind of teleological approach, in fact, to understand this Paris Committee, this Paris Institute as something that is preparing the next step. And the problem is that they are always forgetting that, in fact, the committee itself, the executive, were in Geneva working, these 12 experts. So what is very interesting here is not maybe that these people from Paris are very well connected, but those from Geneva are as well. And the people very connected are these high secretaries from the League of Nations that are never studied, in fact. When we study intellectual cooperation, that's something. When you have Einstein, Marie Curie, and so on in your data set, you study and you write about Einstein. You don't write about the secretary. That's the problem. And about the type of file you use to create these kind of networks. So what is at the basis of a network analysis is exactly the little paper Moreno got from the students from his classroom. So that means you have really to prepare a data set that is like these papers, in fact, couples of identifier for people, nodes, institutions. That can be done very easily, in fact. You don't need a big database to do that. You can take an Excel spreadsheet and make one column with the people who send the letter, one column for the people who get it, a date, where you find the source if you want to keep this information, other information on the importance of this relation if you want to weight the relation because they wrote 3 letters and not just one, and so on. That's a very extremely simple way of coding the data. That's really a column with a source and a column with target, oracle. Yeah. The relation can be something else than letters. So that means that you will just have to choose the order of the 2 columns. So that's not a big deal. And of course, once again, you never begin with the first network you will create is not a network with 3,000 nodes and 30,000 relation between these 3,000 nodes. So you will begin by drawing the metro network of your city. So you will have 100 stops, and you will just draw that this stops 1 goes to stops 2, and then stop 2 to stop 3, stop 3 to stop 4, and you will draw it like that.
Okay, thank you.